Dr Ray Shuey, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Your story, fascinating one. Started in Vicpol, we'll go through it all, but Victoria Police, great stories about Vietnam, which we'll hear all about. Come back, rise to the ranks to be the second to the top, Assistant Commissioner of Victoria Police. You've seen a lot. I'm excited about this one. Tell me take me to the beginning. Why did you join Victoria Police?
I joined the Victoria Police in 1962 as a junior police trainee. I saw there was an opportunity there to serve the community. My father was a Victoria Police officer at the time, so I was naturally following in his footsteps, I suppose. So as a junior police trainee, I joined with many others at that time. Two of those were Peter Tether and Paul Demos, who joined with me at the same time and served later with me in Vietnam as well. So I saw it as a great opportunity to advance my studies and work with the community.
So how long were you in Victoria Police before you were called up for Vietnam?
Probably about 4 or 5 years. I went through the junior police trainees, police cadets, and then through to being a constable, appointed as a constable. I worked at Russell Street for quite a few months, just as on the beat and various roles there. And then I transferred out to Fitzroy as a constable, working the divisional van, general patrols and duties there. And at that stage, I received my call-up notice. My birth date was drawn out, again along with my two other colleagues, Pete Tether and Paul Demos. We're all born on the same day, and we were police colleagues at the time and later served in Vietnam, as I said.
So how old were you when you were called up?
I think I was about 21. The normal age was 20 in the system, but because of the processes in putting you through the system and doing the medicals and all other issues, I was 21 before I actually went into the army.
Okay, and what was the community sentiment around the Vietnam War at the time, and what was your reaction to being called up?
Yes, it was an interesting perspective. Most people didn't understand it. The government was supporting, of course, the United States and South Vietnam in the war effort, and it was seen as appropriate from our point of view that there was military support to South Vietnam. I saw it as unfair, though, from that point of view, that there was no choice, basically. You either your marble was drawn from ballot and somebody else's birth date was the next day or a week later, they missed out. Some people were trying to avoid the military service by various means, and others just copped it sweet, so to speak, and went on and continued to serve their country.
Well, why was the conscription even there? Because we usually rely on volunteers.
Yes, well, there was no concept of volunteers presented at that time, and the Australian services didn't have the capacity in its own right, so there needed to be a supplementary situation of resources to provide that support.
Would you agree with me in saying that today a conscription wouldn't work?
I think there'd be a massive upheaval from the community's point of view. There was at the time people objecting to it, but because it didn't affect everybody, some people said, "Phew, missed me," so it didn't matter. Others tried to avoid the issue by various means, excuses and that sort of thing. But basically, you're in big trouble if you didn't follow the rules at the time, and we couldn't get out of it from a medical point of view, because if we put up any medical excuse for not being conscripted, the police force would automatically say, well, how come you can be in the police force if you can't serve in the military? So we're in a catch-22 and unable to do anything apart from following the rules and regulations at the time.
And were you scared or excited about going to Vietnam?
Yeah, I don't think there was anything. There was no issue from my point of view. I suppose we didn't know when we were called up whether we would go to Vietnam. All we knew that we had to serve in national service for 2 years and a follow-up 3 years after that. But at the time, even after you finished your training, you weren't guaranteed to go or not guaranteed to go. It depended on the cycle of your unit, because the units were being cycled in, even infantry and other units, doing a term there and then a term back in Australia. So it just depends where you were on the cusp of the wave or at the bottom of the trough.
Okay, so let's fast forward to you being in Vietnam. Take us through what you saw there and what you felt when you were over there.
Well, I was posted to Vietnam in December 1967, on the 18th of December, so fast track to Qantas 707 to Melbourne, Darwin, Singapore, and then Saigon. When I arrived at Saigon, we were taken to the Canberra BEQ, which is the Bachelor Enlistment quarters, and that was a converted hotel for the Australian soldiers that were serving in Saigon. So there was about 170 soldiers in the facility there of our troops, and a 5-storey building, top security at the time. They had, all the windows were guarded with metal frames and things of that nature. Guard box and security at the front section, 44-gallon drums filled with dirt and then covered with cement on the top. And wire meshing around all the locations at the building. So reasonably secure, only against the common problems, which were grenade attacks at the time, gunfire, sniper fire. You didn't obviously go onto the balconies or things of that location or on the roof. And they were the normal issues for security there. There were many other hotels that were converted in Saigon. Most of those were operated and controlled by the Americans or other serving forces. So this was just our location where we were bedded down, 2 to a room, stairs, electricity on occasions, no mod cons or anything of that nature, but
hot.
Yeah,
sticky.
Very hot.
No aircon?
No air conditioning.
Unbelievable. I'm out.
So
when you were there, what was your role in the military?
Right, I was appointed as an electronic technician. I'd been through the full program in Australia. I did the full Marconi Wireless School of Wireless electronic technician and cipher training, a 4-year course condensed down to about 8 months. So I did that. My role was to look after the communications networks in Saigon. So basically we had a number of facilities there. We had a system control office, we had a receiver section, and we had a transmitter section, and of course headquarters components. So they were all secure compounds at various locations around Saigon. So my role basically was to make sure that the communications from the field came in securely, was coded and then sent back to Australia and vice versa. So to keep the communications line open, we had to repair any equipment that went down. We had to change the coding system twice a shift. So that meant that nobody could crack the codes during that time, and twice a shift was seen to be appropriate in those areas. We worked 10-hour day shifts and 14-hour night shifts. If we're on day shift and we're on red alert or amber alert, we often had to do security guard as well as our normal duties. So other responsibilities included maintenance of some of the American critical infrastructure, and occasionally I had to go to Benoit, flown by choppers, gunships to Benoit, and also some of the Australian ships, when they come in, if there was a problem that the techs on board couldn't fix, we'd be called down there to try and sort out the problem. I suppose bear in mind it was at a time when we had valves, and we're just coming into transistors. So there was a different sort of format. So basically you didn't take out a motherboard and throw it away. You had to find a fault in whatever was the problem with the valves or transistors or whatever not working properly, and replace them and make sure that everything was up and running. So keep the communications going backwards and forwards to Australia and backwards and forwards to the fields in Vietnam.
So considering so far in your story, we're not talking about frontline explosions and things in your face. Was it a, it sounds like an adventure, or am I simplifying it too much?
Well, I suppose at the time or prior to the war, Saigon was promoted as the Paris of the Orient.
Yeah.
So there were many churches, facilities and great locations there at the time. However, on arrival, everything was tense in terms of what was happening. There were frequent grenade attacks. Motorbike riders would ride around with grenades, and if they saw a group of soldiers, or usually Americans, they'd throw a grenade and be off, and nobody would know, where it came from, except that it was from a motorbike. So there were mortar attacks, insurgents coming into the city, sniper fire and things of that nature. So it was an interesting perspective, because normally the locals would go about their business as if nothing was going on, and then all of a sudden there'd be a bomb blast or a sniper attack or a mortar attack, and everything had shut up, closed down, and we'd have a amber alert or red alert depending on the location. So it was tense, but it wasn't sort of direct confrontation as in the fire front in Nui Dat or out in the field from the other infantry perspectives.
So when it's tense like that, do you feel, when you're there, do you feel a sense of the weight of what's happening and the danger and the gravity of it, or are you disconnected until it happens in your face?
I suppose you get used to it, but the issue was that you had to be 100% looking out for your own safety. So we were transported to and from our locations under guard, of course, and we were armed all the time as well. All our facilities were guarded with guard towers and protective measures around the particular perimeters and that sort of thing. So these issues were always a concern. We were conscious of a number of attacks from grenades, so you always had to be, if you went out in the streets to walk against the traffic, you were very cautious about being in other hotels or locations unless you knew your surroundings. So it's an interesting perspective if you're sort of on guard all the time, but not critically in a life and death situation. So, but that could easily happen, at any stage.
So one of everyone's favourite big corporate companies, Monsanto, were famously using Agent Orange in Vietnam to hack back vegetation. You had a bit of a run-in with Agent Orange. You've seen it. You were in the helicopters deployment?
Yes, we were transported in the helicopters. And they were the same helicopters used today for gunship fire, tomorrow for transportation, next day for dropping Agent Orange out from the drums and things of that nature, or throwing out leaflets to the local people in the countryside saying, "Give up, America is your friend," and that type of thing. So we had exposure there. We also had the issue of wherever we were working, there were sprayed locations because to defoliate the working locations at all our sites, We used the chemicals to clean some of the electronic equipment. And
I didn't know that.
Of course, we didn't have any protective gear like now. You'd have masks and gloves and all that sort of thing. So,
was it good at cleaning? It must have been strong, this stuff.
Yes, well, it was very potent, of course, because it was able to defoliate the jungles. I mean, that was the purpose of having it there. And the enemy would be sneaking through locations in the cover of the jungle. So the American strategy was to cover the whole area, defoliate the area by spraying the Agent Orange and Agent White and other agents across the through the system. And of course that all got into the food network, it got into the rivers, water table and things like that. So there's a whole raft of issues in relation to the use of it. And there was a denial, of course. We didn't use that much, but when they've done the comparative audits on what was used and what wasn't used and how much was ordered, these things stand out completely. So we also in Australia had a Royal Commission in 1985, and of course Monsanto, the owners of the product, presented and said it wasn't a problem, and we believe that the outcome of that Royal Commission was flawed to the detriment of many of the Australian soldiers. And of course there were others out in the field that were in the thick of things. From that point of view, they were going through the jungles, and of course the jungles might have been sprayed the day before or whatever. All the camps around Nui Dat and Vung Tau, around the perimeters, were all sprayed, of course, to make sure there was no locations where the enemy could sneak up and do a surprise attack. So there's a whole conglomeration of issues which has been suppressed as an issue which should have been brought out into the open at that time. Our issue from the point of view of Australia versus America, the American soldiers were all able to claim any war injury attributed to Agent Orange as a matter of course. The Australian system denied that and still denies the fact that Agent Orange was a contributing factor to any war-related diseases.
So they're the things that some of the veterans have experienced as a result of exposure. What does that include?
Well, there's many types of different results that can happen from the exposure to chemicals or Agent Orange, but one of the most telling issues is the fact that any chemicals you take into your body, automatically the body tries and gets rid of it.
Yes.
And that includes smoking, drinking, diabetes, any of those issues. So what happens if the body can't cope? It just sends the chemicals down to your peripheral areas, and in my case it deadens the nerves in your feet and legs, and that makes it hard to balance, and it's an issue that's causes me some concern, but it's something that many other soldiers have suffered, but it's not widely documented in Australia because the claims have always been denied that it's an issue.
That's tragic that we're doing that. So there's not been a lot of support for veterans on that. Just a quick one. Why is it not recognised in Australia but it is in the US?
Well, that's for the governments to determine, but I presume it's for compensation. Because immediately there's a declaration that a product caused some injury or debilitation, then there's an automatic claim for compensation.
Sure.
So in America they went through, and because America had many more soldiers than we did, many more exposures, and we were just a small group in the whole scheme of things. So. But it's an interesting issue because at some stage about 6 or 7 years ago I contacted cancer. I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that was automatically attributed to the fact that I served in the war zone as a war-related injury. And it's pretty hard to rationalise why one is and one not, except cancer obviously has a death sentence.
Yes.
The other just has a debilitating effect on you.
Yeah, okay. So given all these things have happened to you, not by choice, you didn't choose to go over there and get exposed to all this. How do you feel about that coming home? There was a lack of support on the health front, but what about just in general, from Victoria Police, from the community, what was it like coming home?
Well, coming home was just a non-event. Basically, you had to work yourself back into society, work yourself into the police force. So you completed service in Vietnam, come back to receive your discharge papers at Watsonia, and back at work basically the next day, straight onto night shift because you're a new boy on the block. No retraining. Obviously things change in 2 years while you've been away. No thank you, no welcome home. Basically straight into it, and you had to cope the best way you could.
And also no welcome from the community, right? The sentiment towards Vietnam didn't really change until the mid-80s when we started to have parades and so on.
Yeah. Well, I actually modified about 1968, 1969. I came back in 68, of course, and that was when the moratoriums were just firing up in Victoria and the rest of Australia. Complete demonstrations, and that was a hassle from our point of view. We were automatically put on the front line.
Of the protests?
Yeah.
Oh.
So back into looking after the demonstrations, and
you've just been exposed, you just suffered from being over there.
Yeah. So the police force was the authority that was part of that, but we had to control the demonstrations. Most of them were peaceful, but there were issues in relation to some of the aggro and things like that. So there were often brawls and assaults. We were kicked, punched, spat on, abused. So it was just another war zone we came back to. So,
but you can't shoot back.
No, that's right.
So when you come back, you never had a second thought. You were back to Victoria Police.
Yeah.
Was that a mental adjustment to be policing? I mean, how do you approach your service to the communities, Victoria Police, and your service in the military? Is it a different mentality?
Well, it's different completely. When we went there, of course, being a police officer, you're exposed to death and trauma and things of that nature as normal activity, and particularly being at Fitzroy and Russell Street, you copped everything that was presented by the community, the goods and bads of community. But the death and trauma in the war zone was different. We were under siege over there for 4 days at one particular time, and I recorded in my diary that I thought, the last day was going to be my last, and goodbye to everyone. So that was a different type of trauma.
Yes. Because
it was an extended trauma over time, and you didn't know what was going to happen and how it was going to end up. In the police force, it's a different aspect. You go home at night time, of course.
Yes.
You look after whatever the issues are during the daytime, and sometimes there's good things and bad things. So, and you face death and tragedy, of course, on a daily basis. But usually, at the end of your shift, you go home and you start afresh the next day.
And so your rise through Victoria Police, why did you rise up to through the command structure into such a high level? Many police I speak to say it's better off not to rise through the political ranks.
Yeah, well, it's a different perspective, but I suppose as each rank goes, you change your focus because you see it from a different perspective. Even moving from constable, senior constable to sergeant, you take on a supervisory role. And from a junior point of view, you always think, when I get up to the next level, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to fix it for people at my level. And then when you get to the next level, you've got different challenges to deal with. So that presents as a different problem, and then you've got to look after the people that you've been promoted above. So, and that applies at every level. You have a responsibility, a caretaker role to look after your, not only the community, but also your subordinates as well. And also you have to be responsible to, at higher levels, to the command structure and of course to government as well. And that in its own right is a different type of responsibility, because instead of having a singular responsibility for one particular incident, you've then got to look at everything from a broader perspective, a holistic approach in terms of the community and the police force to look after those sort of issues collectively so that you get a win-win out of all the issues. And that applies to government as well. Government dictate a number of things that you're responsible for, but you have to satisfy that responsibility, and you also have to make sure that the community and your subordinates are addressed in a very win-win situation. So we're not crueling any part of society or favouring any areas. It's looking at it from a more holistic point of view and integrated.
Okay, and so did the Vietnam experience shape or influence the way you did policing when you got back, or even you as a person? Did it change you as a person?
I'm sure it did, and 2 years out of your life in the military is an extended period of discipline. The police force is focused on discipline, of course, and outcomes. The safety first, I think, is always an issue, and I've had that right through my career, is your own safety and the safety of your colleagues and the community. So that transferred during my police career as well to take up major roles in looking after operational safety of members. So during the 1990s, we had a number of police shootings, and we brought in safety first principles to look after the members, make sure their safety was utmost and secure, and make sure that the outcomes of any incident they were to attend, critical incidents, resulted in the safest possible outcomes for all concerned. That's the police, the public, the community. So most assuredly, the issues from Vietnam, I suppose, toughened us up for many of the issues later in life. And I think it also looked at the issues of perhaps a fait accompli, that there are some things that are determined in life that you can't change. There are some that you can change. If you have the capacity to do it, well, go for it. If you can't change it, it's a bit of a useless exercise, belting your head against a brick wall and not achieving any outcomes. So there's some basic philosophies, I suppose. The other issue, I suppose, I look at in terms of the whole international structure that, we're really pawns in a system, in a big game of chess, and people in power, people with money, often determine the future of others' lives. And this comes back to the no choice from that point of view, and how do you fight City Hall? So you need to have structured approaches to actually get those issues dealt with and to raise them in the public forum. And this is part of what we're involved with now in not-for-profit organisations, trying to raise the ante of people without a voice in the community and strengthen their capacity to actually put forward the issues that really matter to them.
What organisation?
The Community Advocacy Alliance, and we promote ourselves as the voice of the community. I'm also chairman of not-for-profit, the International Safety Foundation, which looks after issues internationally. So we actually focus on trying to raise the ante of the common voice, because often that gets quashed. It's, there's power, there's money in the community. We always say follow the money trail, whatever's happening in the system, where's the money going? Because that usually dictates why decisions are being made. So I think the whole structure of the police force, the whole structure of Vietnam and coming up through those disciplined organisations needing a strategy, working with the community, and trying to get outcomes helps to shape the person you are in life. So I found it very beneficial, even though it was hard at the time, but so is life.
What are your regrets from your long career? Both Vietnam's a short period, but your policing career?
I don't see any regrets. I suppose we can always do things differently. We can always have a wiser head on a younger pair of shoulders. This is the issue of trying to actually be able to do something, to mean something in life, to achieve outcomes that actually matter. So I think that's a critical issue, that you just need to be able to say that you've been involved in things and you have improved the system or made it better for everyone. Internationally, I see that the big issues, every family in the world is basically the same. It doesn't matter whether you're in China, Vietnam, Iran, any of the countries. When you talk to the people, Saudi Arabia, all the family people are the same. All they want is for their children to grow up with a better education and a better life that they can help them with. So, and if you see that at the lower level, and then you see people at the higher level manipulating the system to use these people to do their bidding, basically, so they can make more money or get more power, then that's sort of not something we can control and difficult to understand. But it sort of comes back to the war involvement from Vietnam. I mean, we were there. There was a common enemy, which was the Viet Cong. I've been back to Vietnam working on at least 12 occasions over there. I've been to nearly all the provinces. I've been to North Vietnam still, South Vietnam. There's still a divide in the country, and it's a long time since the actual takeover of South Vietnam. So, but I've got friends in all the cities. I've got colleagues there. So, and we're all the same, and it doesn't matter. One time we were fighting, and it's not much different to Germany, Japan, the World War I and II, where there was enemies on all sides, and yet now we're all friends. So it's hard to comprehend on an international perspective that these are issues, but they're important.
Well, the perspective you gave of being pawns in the system, that's your enemies one day and colleagues the next. It does sound like a bunch of pawns being moved around. Can I ask you a little bit deeper on that to finish off? Because you've raised a couple of times this idea of following the money, that's where decisions get made. You have a unique perspective. You're very high up in Victoria Police, a big institution. And whenever I speak to a politician who gets fairly high up, like John, Deputy PM, I've spoken to, or you or Kelglett, people who were in positions of power, you all seem to say the same thing roughly, which is I could only do so much. And then the rest of us on the ground look to people like you in power and say, why aren't you changing things? Why aren't you fixing things? So where is the solution in all this? Because no matter where I go to get a solution, everyone says, well, I can't change, as a politician, I can't change it. And then the police commissioner says, well, I can't change it, it's the politicians. And no one seems to have the power.
Well, I think if you look at Victoria particularly, we're now controlled to a degree in terms of the major positions, and there's a lot of political involvement in the system. And it's almost like a them and us type of concept that develops in the process, and we look at it from a point of no man is an island to themselves, and in isolation you can't do things, but you need to collectively to counteract some of these issues. So if you then got to come back to the basic philosophy of transparency in what happens, integrity, justice in the community, and major issues like this, which are the backbone of our democratic society. Once these get diluted, then you end up with a system that is controlled and not necessarily for the point of being good outcomes for the community. So the issues really need a whole lot of community engagement, because democracy is about communities. It's about, of the people, for the people, by the people. It's not people setting up dictatorships in the system and then controlling all the pawns or all the chess pieces in different locations. So that's when everything starts to, I suppose, devalue its integrity, and we then have a diluted system of democracy. So, the issue always is nobody's asked me, nobody's asked us what we feel about particular issues. So it is an issue. We have a democratic system in society, but it's not necessarily the best in the world. And then we say, well, where can we go for the best in the world? Do we go to America? No. Do we go Europe? No. So you have a blurred system of control of the community. And it's really, we're talking about community control, which is hard to fathom. We should have an integrated, holistic and system working together that produces outcomes for benefit the majority of the community. So, and it's hard to put that philosophy down and actually do it as an implementation strategy. So you need strong people in the community to actually deliver those outcomes. If they are then not corrupted by a better job, a better opportunity, more finances, investments in different programs and things of that nature, then you can have straight shooters. But it's very hard to pinpoint and say somebody is a straight shooter in society, that they're there for honourable purposes to serve the community and get the best outcomes of the community, not for themselves. And I think a lot of people are very selfishly trying to increase their power, trying to increase their financial situation, and the rest of the community don't matter. They can scream and carry on and have the occasional demonstrations, but what's it matter? So it's a dilemma, and I don't have the solution. I just have some concepts that we can put forward to discuss with other people in similar situations to actually try and ensure, number one, transparency in authority, and integrity and justice for all.
Noble way to end. Ray, this footage will be immortalised. Yes, in the War Memorial of Victoria Police. We were also immortalised in the National Libraries and the State Library. So if someone was to watch this in 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what would you want to say to someone who's living 100 years from now in this little time capsule we're creating? What would you tell that person about this period that they're researching?
Well, I think it's probably immortalised in the words of Winston Churchill. If we don't take notice of history, then we're bound to or doomed to repeat the same mistakes again. So if we're still having wars in 50, 100 years' time, and we've got to say why, because aren't we happy with our locations where we are, with our life where we are? We'll kill off hundreds of thousands of more people with different modes of warfare and things of that nature. We'll become enemies and friends, and we just have to ask the issue why. This is one of my key features, to say why. Why is this happening? Why can't we do something better? So I'd be continually making sure that the next generations follow through with that philosophy of why. We tend to accept everything as standard procedure and say, well, somebody said it's right, so it must be right. But why? What's the rationale? What benefit do we get? Are we developing a safer society? Are we developing a better community? Are we going to have peace? I doubt it, because there's, the war machine is there. It's a big financial, multi-billion-dollar industry.
Multi-trillion now.
Yeah, that's right. So it's going to go on and on and on. And, some people want wars forever because it feeds their financial issues and their power base. So it's a dilemma. I don't have the solution, but it's just a warning that we have to watch it for the future. We have to look after our children, our grandchildren. We want them to have a safe and happy community and be able just to go about their business without interference and without major threats to society. We don't want another conscription. We don't want another war that we're involved with, but that may be inevitable.
Asking why is a good start. It's been an honour, Dr Ray Shuey, for being here. Thank you for telling the story.
Thank you.
Thank you.